Hello guys, it's me George, and today I wanted to talk about something that I've noticed within the traditional witchcraft, folkloric witchcraft community for some time now, but more particularly within the past 6 months, definitely within the past 6 months. But I think in order to do this, we need to rewind, right? So before I begin, I want to say that I make absolutely no harsh criticisms against people that hold these views or the content creators that have talked about these views or the authors that have talked about these views. And in fact, I encourage you to actively look at their work. And I think it's really important to look at their work. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was this delineation almost that is kind of taking place, which I will get into. But as mentioned, we need to rewind, we need to go back into history. So let's go back when The Witch, the film The Witch, that folk horror film with Black Phillip was in it, and every traditional witch kind of wet their knickers a little bit. I know I did. But let's kind of talk about that because it was at that point for me watching the film, it not only felt like recognition as a traditional witch, but more awareness of the crooked path in general, just in public. But one of the things that I was very hyper aware of was that I knew there would become this kind of upsurge, a surge within the occult community that focused on more traditional witchcraft and folkloric aspects of witchcraft. And what's really interesting is that for me, I kind of had it in my head and I kind of knew, I was like, right, okay, this is going to be a thing. There's going to be this huge boom, almost like this sort of popularity of traditional witchcraft because of this film. And it sounds so stupid, but it does happen. You kind of see that pop culture and the media can have an effect within some people within the occult community. And it is kind of something, if you look at various films, you kind of look over the years and see this upsurge in certain paths within the occult community having a kind of correlation to media and pop culture, which is really interesting and kind of a bit strange at times. But one of the things I did notice is that after that film, The Witch, which I believe was around 2009, maybe 2010, I'm not sure when it came out to the top of my head. This is an off the cuff video, but it is something that I've tried to do videos about, but it's been hard for me to kind of explain this, so I hope that you guys get this. But and we see this within the occult community, that there does seem to be this kind of every around 10 years or so, there kind of seems to be this boom within certain traditions. In the 90s, it was Wicca. It was kind of Wicca, 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 and everyone kind of went crazy for Wicca. And then, people started getting more into hoodoo. There was a big hoodoo kind of boom where everyone was like a conjure man or a conjure. And then cut to 2009, 2010, there was this boom in traditional craft. And, a lot of people were kind of like, oh, fuck's sake, let's just see the trendsetters coming in now, which I do get, because I don't think traditional craft is a path of popularity. It's not that at all. In fact, it's anti that. Not everybody is suitable to walk the crooked path, and that's not an expression of elitism. That's actually just realism. This path is not for everyone, and that is okay. It is a particular path for particular people, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. But I remember back in the day when I'm having a Leo moment. So perhaps this was a thing. Perhaps I may have started a thing. Who knows? Perhaps it was always there before. I don't know. But I remember when I was talking about the definition of traditional witchcraft and how that in itself could be quite problematic. And I was talking about this way back when, probably about 2009 times. Check my past videos, it will be there. Perhaps I think it's on defining traditional witchcraft. There's another couple. But one of the things I mentioned that was, for me, a more accurate term to describe traditional witchcraft was folkloric witchcraft. Now, perhaps I read it in a book, perhaps it was already a thing. But after that video, I started noticing people were using this term, folkloric witchcraft, like more and more and more and more. I'm not saying I started a thing. I'm saying maybe I started a thing. I don't know. But yeah, it was a term for me at the time that was more accurately descriptive of what I do. But I did start to see a boom in that. I'm not sure if my videos are that influential, if I'm honest, do you know what I mean? Gotta eat humble pie, but it was interesting that after that video online, I did start to see this term folkloric witchcraft kind of boom, much the same way that people would read Sarah Ann Lawless's blog, The Witch of Forest Grove. I missed that, chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. And she used to talk about the term animist or animism. And then after that, everyone within the traditional witchcraft was using the terminology of animism, which, to be fair, is completely valid and accurate. Do you know what I mean? But after her blog, I did start to see this kind of upsurge within the terms and uses of animism. My vlogs aren't as influential as Witch of Forest Grove or anything like that, and I am not saying that. But I did notice this kind of boom in the term folkloric witchcraft. Within the past 6 months, maybe even a year, and for years, before I talk about this, for years I've seen people that use the terms folkloric witchcraft and traditional witchcraft interchangeably, much the same way as the term oldcraft or the crooked path, the nameless art. It has many names, and that's kind of the point of it, is that you can't really pin it down. It's its own path, it's its own way, it's its own different serpent. And I always use the terms folkloric witchcraft or folk witchcraft and traditional witchcraft or tradcraft or traditional craft interchangeably. And it's only been about the past year, interestingly, that I have started to see more of a delineation amongst traditional craft and folkloric witchcraft, almost not necessarily like a schism or anything like that, like nothing like that, but more of a kind of defined definition as of what is folkloric craft and as of what is traditional craft. And I am in no way, shape or form attacking anybody, by the way. I kind of need to make that clear. But there are a couple. Roger J. Horn done a blog post, which was very, very interesting, by the way. And I love Roger's work. I love it. Fantastic author. Very, very talented. If you don't have any of his books, definitely please have a look, because I really enjoy the way that he writes. It's very beautiful. And it's simplistic and beautiful. I really like his work, and he's become quite an influential figure within folkloric witchcraft. And he done a blog post about this, and so did Ariana, the Oak Witch. If you are not subscribed to her channel, please go and check Ariana out. She is amazing. And, Roger, Ariana, if you're both watching this, hey! But it's really interesting that it's not just limited to those two individuals. There are like more people that are talking about this and saying this. But essentially, this content that was produced was making more of a delineation between traditional craft and folkloric witchcraft, making more of perhaps a separation. I would use the term delineation more. Essentially, ascribing to traditional witchcraft to an initiatory mystery pre-Gardnerian or based off a pre-Gardnerian tradition. So the three main ones being Fairy Anderson branch of traditional witchcraft, the Clan of Tubal Cain, and the Andrew Chumley's Cultus Sabbatic craft. Now, I don't want to comment too much on these three traditions because I am not an initiate of any of those traditions, so I don't feel like I have a right to talk about that because I don't know what goes on fully in those three traditions. And, you know, there was this separation between traditional craft and folkloric witchcraft, and folkloric witchcraft being involved in bioregionalism of the land, working with the genus loci, the spirits of place, being based on more folk aspects of witchcraft. And that's not to say these three traditions or other traditions of pre-Gardnerian based witchcraft kind of don't hold that, because they do. Like the Clan of Tubal Cain works with the folk festivals, that much I know. But again, I don't feel comfortable delving too much into explaining that and going into those, just out of respect for those traditions as well. But, you know, folk witchcraft being very based around spirits, being very spirit-led, being very focusing on the spirits of the land, ancestors, familiars, the devil, old Clutie or old Nick, old Scratch, old Horny. But it's interesting because for me, for years, I have used the terms traditional craft and folkloric witchcraft interchangeably, and I know so many other people that have. Perhaps I've been practicing for like over 20 years within traditional craft, but perhaps I've been living under a rock. I don't know. Perhaps has this always been a thing? For me, it's never been a thing. It's just always been used interchangeably, which is really, really interesting. So my question is there perhaps not necessarily a split, but maybe a fork in the crooked path, maybe a sort of harder delineation within the traditional witchcraft and folkloric witchcraft current? Has this always been a thing? Another thing that I have noticed as well, with the rise of popularity within folkloric witchcraft, I have seen this kind of, and this is not a read, this isn't a read at all. I really hope this doesn't come across as horrible or critical or anything like that. And at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to judge someone's practice because someone else's practice is none of my fucking business. Like, I genuinely feel like today, in this day and age, there is a lot of policing other people's practice and practices, which is just not my bag. But I do feel like within folkloric, or people that have kind of gone under that term of folkloric witchcraft, for me, I've not necessarily seen loads of practices that seem very rooted in folklore within witchcraft. Perhaps there are some practitioners I've seen that are quite morely new age, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But coining something folkloric witchcraft or folk witchcraft, when kind of what I'm seeing seems to be pointing more towards the new age and aspects of the new age, working heavily with crystals and you know, the incorporation of sort of ideas from the East, like chakras and mantra and tantra and things like that, and you know, the things that have become assimilated into the new age movement. That doesn't mean that mantra, tantra and chakras are explicitly new age. They come from another completely different tradition that's kind of been adopted, and some would say stolen, by the kind of new age movement. Now, again, if that's how you work, I'm not going to sit here and police that. That's none of my business. It's not my practice to police. It's not my place to sort of govern how someone practices. But I definitely think that there are some people that are going by the terms of folkloric witchcraft that aren't necessarily showing to me online, or portraying to anybody online a folk-based practice. Perhaps it's different when the cameras are off, do you know what I mean? And like someone's online presence or what they show about their online practice doesn't define their witchcraft. Certainly for me, like the things that I do off camera, I would never tell people online, and I wouldn't. Or certain things that are happening within my path, like I just, for me, like I have a boundary, I have a limit to what I put online. So I think that makes a huge difference. Could be the case. And again, I'm not necessarily judging people for doing this. Like if that's your bag of tits and that works for you, that's absolutely fine. But for me, when someone says folkloric witchcraft, for me, it takes me to a more agricultural, rural form of craft. Now, whether that be in a city or in a rural setting, it doesn't matter. It's morely the practice, you know? So things like finding lost objects, influences from the cunning folk, you know, catching thieves, healing, walk hunting, things like that. And I'm not here to define ultimately, again, I know I keep reiterating this, but I really want to make this clear. I'm just saying that I have noticed some people within the folkloric witchcraft community that have been talking about things and labeling things as folkloric witchcraft, but it's not necessarily, to my eyes, and not just to me, to a lot of other practitioners. They're like, that's not folkloric witchcraft, that's just more like a form of witchcraft with a lot of new age sort of elements within that. But again, you know, I'm not kind of policing that. I'm just stating that even within this element of folkloric witchcraft, there are things that don't, how do I put this? It just doesn't like ring true, not even ring true. It just doesn't portray folkloric witchcraft. Again, when cameras are off, it could be a completely different thing. I don't know. But it does seem to have been a bit of a sort of a delineation. And not only that, I've seen quite a few well-seasoned practitioners that have kind of are well-seasoned, are well-respected within the community, kind of actually talking about this and saying, look, what are some people doing, labeling it this? That's not actually traditional craft, that's not actually folkloric witchcraft. That's more like of a new age concept with certain practices and ideas. So it's interesting to see. And again, if someone does identify it as folkloric witchcraft or traditional, whatever you use, and they do things that, you know, they may be thinking, well, actually, yeah, I do a lot of new age stuff, whatever, go you. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, like, the only thing really that matters to me is my own personal practice and the relationship I have with the spirits that I work with and the land that I'm on. And I'm not here to police anyone else's practice, but I do think that I'm just speaking morely about this kind of, there seems to have become a shift within the traditional witchcraft and folkloric community. There seems to have kind of been this, just a shift that's almost different, that is going kind of different ways. And it's interesting, and I feel like it needs to be spoken about. So there. For me, I will still use the terms traditional witchcraft, folkloric witchcraft interchangeably, because I always have. And I don't, for me, see... I understand the delineations, and it does make more sense, because traditional witchcraft is, in by definition, a tradition of something. And if it's a tradition, it's something that perhaps is either handed down or passed on. So from the sort of mystery traditions, I get it. I do get these delineations. Don't get me wrong. It's not me saying I don't get these delineations, because I do. But I don't know. I feel like I need to talk about this, because it is something that has kind of been occurring recently, and it's interesting. So yeah, let me know. Let me know, guys, if you have any comments or any thoughts. It'd be really interesting to hear your perspectives. I hope this video hasn't come across in any sort of shitty way to anyone making these delineations, because that's not what I'm about. It's not about that. It's morely just I am noticing a shift within the community. So yeah, I hope you guys are all good. Over and out, and peace.